Turn on? Yes. All right. Thanks very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Bram Govaerts as the Director of CIMMYT to Coffee today to give us a talk, and there'll be a program of engagements after this meeting. It's also important to note that it's not just the people in this room, there are also people online from our remote coffee sites. So also welcome you. I'm not sure where the camera is, where I'm looking up there, I guess. Welcome to you as well. And I'm just reminded, if you could put questions in the chat at the end of it, we'll catch up with those questions. So just a little bit about Bram. There's probably pages and pages that I could read out, but basically Bram has expertise in bioscience, engineering and soil science, and he's been very heavily involved through his career at the coalface of conducting research and also engaging with farmers in farming systems. And one of the most notable projects that he's been associated is called Mass Agro in Mexico, which was a real collaboration with farmers, scientists, trainers, extension agents, communicators, technology specialists, and that has been shown to have positively impacted the lives of 2.5 million people in Mexico alone. And it's now a model which is being rolled out in Africa as well. So that impact has resulted in not only over 90 peer-reviewed publications, but in a whole series of other awards. He's a professor at large at Cornell, won the Norman Borlaug Field Award in 2014 from the World Food Prize Foundation, and he's a fellow of the American Society of Agronomy for his outstanding contributions to the field of agronomy. So we really look forward to hearing from you, Bram. Before we do, here at the University of Queensland, we always acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet, and we pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, and we recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and social and global society. And I guess in the context of international development, we acknowledge all of the Indigenous peoples that we work with and for across the world. So I might leave it there and hand over to Bram.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Right, so thank you, Matthew, for that great introduction, and thanks also for the invitation here. And thank you for coming on a Friday morning to this seminar. I know you could be doing other things. There's quite a few firsts here, but definitely also I would have never imagined I would give a seminar in the Brain Research Institute auditorium. I don't think I'm smart enough for that, but happy to be here with you. So I have the honor to right now be the Director General of CIMMYT, and Matthew already sketched out some of the career. I do know several of you know CIMMYT, but still wanted to give a bit of an introduction of what CIMMYT is. It is the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. The numbers of impact, 70% of wheat, 50% of maize worldwide, comes from a background of CIMMYT. Now, when we talk about CIMMYT, it's not just the institution, it is the network of partners around it. And why I'm here today is because we want CIMMYT to be a better partner for the university. We're already partnering, but I think we can do it more structurally, more programmatically, more strategically. Quite some return on investment numbers. And of course, we have offices in several countries. Our headquarters are in Mexico, and that has a historic reason. We have offices in 17 other countries, all of those in the global south, but active in or impact in over 80 countries. So CIMMYT's history, of course, starts when 80 years ago, actually, Norman Borlaug arrived in Mexico, invited by the Office of Special Studies, which was a research office put together with support from the then Vice President of the US and the President of Mexico. Those efforts later on resulted in the Green Revolution. So breeders here know the dwarfing gene, the resistance that was created by shuttle breeding between the center of Mexico, which is a highland area, cold, wet, and then the desert area in Obregon in the north of Mexico. And so you could do 2 seasons. We still do those two seasons. That shuttle breeding resulted in the new varieties that then generated the Green Revolution in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, for which Norman Borlaug received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970s. In the middle here, CIMMYT was born as an international center by the grace of Mexico, our host country. And that's today how we still operate. Just one quick reminder, several years ago, after the not last food crisis, but food crisis before, we did quite some work with Lloyd's of London in order to do a set of scenarios with their actuaries. The reason was because Lloyd's of London did not have food security or food insecurity or food system shocks as a known risk. So it was not calculated within their insurance portfolio. And so we thought that if we wanted to make a shift through the system, we needed actually to visualize the risk of food system shocks. So it would be a known risk for the finance sector. So CIMMYT did support this scenario building exercise. So what we basically did was, in order to make the probability 1 in 100, which is a minimum probability you need to be a known risk, we took 5 big events that happened the past 20 years and said, what happens if we put them all lined up in 1 year? So this was what this scenario was about. It was about an outbreak of UG99, which is a rust disease that was detected in Uganda in 99, still around, recently arrived in Nepal. CIMMYT is supporting the detection systems or the early warning systems for that. So if 1 year you have a strong UG99 outbreak, if at the same time you have El Nino, if you have warmer temperatures moving up from the south upwards, if you bring all that together, this scenario, we asked what would be the impact on global stability and especially the financial markets. So the scenario ran through a whole lot of modeling and identified that if this would be the impact, sorry, and I missed one key element, these are of course shocks on the wheat system only. So it's simplified, it's a scenario, it's not a future prediction, it is a scenario. So if this wheat scenario would run through, the impact would be global production losses would be 7%, for wheat, maize 10%, soybean 11%, and rice 7%. Of course, because you have substitution, right? Even if the shock is on wheat, the decisions farmers will make, markets will make, will distribute those shocks on the other main cereals. That would have resulted in, or that would result in 4 times price increases for wheat, maize, and soybean, and 5 times for rice. And then really important for Lloyd's of London being the biggest reinsurer is that would result in humanitarian crisis, food riots, but very important is those 2 last numbers, 10% of reduction of stock market in the European Union and 5% in the US. So just to show that using some of those tools that are completely outside of our world as agriculturalists, using the actuaries in an insurance space can actually visualize the value of what we do beyond our own environment. Based on the same, CIMMYT started a strategy process to say, what do we want CIMMYT to be and to look like in order to serve a future view? And so we used the same capabilities, set up 4 scenarios for a future world. These are still today the potential scenarios. So it's 2 extremes. On the one end, you have insufficient food production and excessive consumption patterns accelerate technological innovation. And it's focused on decreasing inefficiency at the margins and is not transformative. At the other extreme, you have climate conscious food production and consumption patterns are established, underpinned by innovation in the global food system, and new technologies are available. The other 2 extremes are great stability in global governance versus instability in global governance. And we described then the 4 scenarios within those within those quadrants. It's quite interesting to reread those scenarios regularly because you can pick up signals of each of the scenarios probably happening globally as we speak. Look at some elections in some countries, look at some decisions around closing borders for science or opening borders for science, look at the global governance. What we then did was say, if these are the realities, what are the no regret things CIMMYT needs to work on so that it is relevant for either of those 4 scenarios, and which is the scenario we actually want to actively drive towards, which is probably the top, the one on climate conscious food production and great stability, stable global governance. So within the frame of that, we designed CIMMYT's 2100 vision. So the question was, if those that are there in 2100 look back at the decision we took today, what kind of CIMMYT do we want them to see? Now, you may say 2100, that's very far away. But if you have small kids or nephews or grandchildren of less than 10 years old, the probability that they will still be around in 2100 is actually quite high. It's not that far away. So with that vision, we came up with what CIMMYT wants to be today. CIMMYT should be a global thought leader and change agent for climate resilient, sustainable, and inclusive agricultural development for a food and nutrition secure future. Now, that is a step different than what CIMMYT was when it started in the Office of Special Studies. Saying it quite extreme, when CIMMYT was created, it was about enough calories for people to have enough calorie intake. What we're looking at today is nutrition and food security within the boundaries of those systems. Why thought leader, change agent? It has inherently that you cannot do on your own. And we need people like Queensland University, to join us in this journey. So that resulted in our 2030 strategy. 2030 strategy is aligned and supports the One CGIAR strategy. So some of you that know a little bit of our world, we are the center on maize and wheat. Matthew comes from the center on rice. There's a center on potatoes in Peru, etc., etc. All together, I know you also received Apollinaire here from Ilri. So that's the livestock center. So all together, we form a network called CGIAR. We went through a transformative process as one CGIAR, and have a common strategy that is available. Under that strategy, we'd identified what CIMMYT would be delivering. We developed the strategy as an inclusive and participatory process, and it's a vision to transform agriculture and improve lives. We identified 3 important pillars within our strategy. Discovery, call it our innovation, our science. So that's where we can work with you on upstream, and we transform that into or translate that in application. System dev pillar is those big systems projects. Matthew mentioned Masagro, where you bring in over 150 partners, you work with public-private sector, but you really want to get something done in a country. You want to shift an entire ecosystem of wheat or an entire ecosystem of maize. You want the big companies to either to instead of buy from Iowa, to start and shipping it to Mexico, to start buying it from smallholder farmers. Or you want an ecosystem in in Zambia, Tanzania, Malawi, to really set up a vibrant seeds sector, but also a nascent food sector, and of course, farmers serving that. That's the system dev, the big systems interventions. And then nascent, experimental a little bit, CIMMYT Inc. How can we set up a pillar that can work differently with private sector? But also this comes from the realization that there may be innovations generated in CIMMYT that would never make it into a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation proposal. But that could be an interesting idea for a startup to run with. Or the realization that our data could de-risk a private sector company to go into a certain area where it naturally wouldn't go in because the risk is too high. But if we can offer the data, if we can be involved in setting up that company in a smart way, it could actually open up companies for areas where we want the impact to be generated. So Inc. probably 20% what we're doing, 80% we still need to learn. So I think there's quite some interest to learn from what you have done in that innovative setup or in that innovative space. System dev, 60%. We probably know we have been piloting Masagro. We have been replicating that. Now we need a learning and we need to systematize so that we can replicate. Discovery, probably 80% right, and 20% innovation, new ideas, new thinking, different ways of doing the breeding, cross-learning needs to happen. We then identified a couple of components: excellence in science and innovation, excellence in operations, resource mobilization, partnerships, influence and advocacy for impact, and of course, the all-encompassing talent management. If we zoom into our strategic objectives of the excellence in science and innovation, our first objective is be a better partner, which is the one you see up here. How can we be a better partner for you? What do we need to do to translate and find that partnership, not on a one-off project, but on a very strategic programmatic level? Second primary objective, our innovations, new seeds, new agronomy, new decision support tools. Third objective, a little bit newer or different, how do we underpin farmer livelihood trajectories? Now, the word trajectory is extremely important. It is not about measuring, do those farm families have a better livelihood today? It is about how do we underpin a trajectory of a better livelihood throughout the existence of that farm family. Because if you just measure the today, probably cash transfers may be more effective. But that cash transfer is not necessarily generating a trajectory forward. So just not wanting to discuss here cash transfers or not, but just giving kind of the nuance around measuring livelihood and the livelihoods framework. Fourth objective is then, even if we generate better livelihood trajectories, even if we generate the best science and innovation, even if we are the best partner, if that happens outside of the carrying capacity of those agri-food systems, if that's not where we want to be. So our guiding principles is the fourth objective: climate resilient, sustainable, inclusive agri-food systems. Last but not least is the realization that we have a lot of data and information that could underpin decision-making at different scales, be it the farmer and she deciding how much fertilizer to apply, or all the way up the guys that are making speeches right now in New York in the UN General Assembly, Security Council. What data, what information can we put on the table? Can we transform the data that we have into decision-making at different scales? So that's our fifth objective. Under the belief that, of course, if we want to be transformative, you need to decide, you need to influence those trigger points into the different scales of decision-making globally. All this is towards 5 impact areas. Another one we did was identify what are our hills and mountains to actually realize that. So we have been quite upfront about our limitations, and I'm sure you can help with resolving some of those limitations, being it about exactly data systems, being it about better gene editing, being it about better breeding technology that we need to bring in into the different programs, being about gender equity and social inclusion and the understanding of power relations within innovation adoption, within innovation use. We did an analysis of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the green revolution. And one of the elements was, okay, today, looking back 50 years ago, there were unintended consequences. And the source of those unintended consequences was the realization of natural resources. The Brundtland Commission only happened in 1982. So in the 60s, the realization of sustainability, finite resources wasn't there. Second was about the systemic and the power relations within the generation of innovations. So if we do this again today, the question is 50 years from now, somebody's going to look at us and say, why did you take those decisions? It had unintended consequences. This is going to happen. So the only thing we can do is try to generate as much as we can information about what we don't know. So there's a strong push to have rapid feedback loops to be able to course correct wherever we are taking decisions that go outside of the consequences we're trying to provoke. As I said, we're operating in all these countries here. So you can see every country with a color is where we have impact. We are a bit more open now that we have indeed also impact on developed countries. 60% of the wheat in the US comes from the research collaboration with CIMMYT. The ACIR here in Australia did their latest numbers, and so collaboration with CIMMYT represent 98% of the wheat grown in Australia. So doing development cooperation does pay off also for Australian farmers. Where does the journey start? CIMMYT safeguards 28%, and I hope the camera can follow me. CIMMYT does safeguard 28,000 different maize accessions, 140,000 different wheat accessions in the big gene bank. This is an invitation. Those that haven't visited CIMMYT yet, always welcome, close to Mexico City. Next time Matthew goes, just ask us to accompany him. This is, of course, a big collection. One of the elements we have been working on is, can we actually take all this biodiversity and do allele mining under the philosophy that any new variety that is developed today will only reach farmers 10 years from now. We can try to shorten that period, but still it's going to take a while, and then it's going to be in the field for another 20 years. Now, if climate change is shifting things, should we be looking at alleles that need to go into that breeding effort that may not be relevant today, but that are a no-regret investment, given that this will arrive in the future different climate out there many years ago? That may also mean that the climate we're targeting, or the area we're targeting, has a climate that is more similar to another site than it is to its past. Yeah, so how is the impact of climate change actually shifting the way we project futures forward? May it be better to go to the Mediterranean climate for some of the European climates, vis-a-vis projecting past data we have on climate to either predict? I don't know. I don't know the answer. That's too sophisticated. I'm a simple agronomist, but the people in CIMMYT and other CG centers are trying to do that allele mining and identify those no-regret alleles within the big biodiversity. And I'm sure several of you are active in that. So that, of course, then goes into the wheat breeding strategies for increased climate resilience. So the breeding programs are shifting towards improved adaptation to increased temperatures and tolerance to heat waves. I think here is an interesting thought exercise to do around what does a hotter world look like? Can we heat-proof some of the systems? What are the maximum boundaries of doing that with the current machinery of our crops? Can we tweak that or not? Do we need to think completely different? This wheat is tested in Obregon. Obregon went to 48 degrees Celsius. That is last summer. What happens if that goes to 50? Are we then at the boundary? 51, is that the break point? I don't know. I think there's a lot of interesting elements to test out there. Of course, the importance of CIMMYT's work is its international breeding network. Through multiple stakeholders and partners, because that allows us to test for different diseases. So you can see this map where we target each of the materials we develop under pressure for different wheat diseases, and how that can be benefited from. The breeding is done in an international breeding network, and so you can see here the red dots is where the public sector receives wheat accessions every year, and the blue dot is where the private sector receives wheat accessions from CIMMYT every year. So this is a yearly picture. Also here, I would like, just for one moment, I went too fast and doesn't want me to go back. Okay. Do want to highlight the importance, for example, of the support from Mexico, because Mexico as a country is helping us to allow us to send out in a safe, biosafe way all those seeds globally, right? If something goes wrong, it's going to be Mexico as a country where it all left that is going to be held accountable on the international stage. So do want to give a shout out and recognition of the importance of our host country. If you look at what the impact has been between 2015 and 2023, more than 308 CIMMYT-derived spring wheat varieties were released by national partners in 27 countries. In South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, CIMMYT-derived varieties are grown in nearly 80% of the world's wheat fields. And he doesn't want to move. Another element is, of course, if we want to go to food and nutrition security, the nutritional element has two aspects. You can take the seeds and improve their zinc content. This is an example. So if we go to Pakistan, where a lot of the wheat is consumed not through companies, but through flower generation at family level and then making the food products for the family. The recently released variety Akbar 19 has increased zinc capabilities or zinc content, and that is now benefiting 97 million wheat consumers in Pakistan. But of course, if you really want to go to nutrition and resilience, that's that crop diversification piece. And this is where CIMMYT traditionally works on maize and wheat, but today has decided that we actually need those crop rotations. We need sorghum, millets, chickpeas, groundnuts to actually support the maize and wheat production systems. And that may mean less maize and wheat, less area of maize and wheat in order to introduce some of those diversified crops. Also brought the realization that the investment in those crops hasn't been the same than the investment in maize and wheat, and potentially rice for that matter. So the research capacity that is installed in human resources, in data systems, in experimental sites, hasn't been the same for those crops than it has been for maize and wheat. So there's two things you can do. You can say, let's then rapidly pump in more resources to beef it up. Or you could say, can we open up space where some of those crops can be put on that infrastructure that exists for maize and wheat, and that can then be leapfrogged forward in its performance or in its research attention. And probably what is best is doing something in the middle, right? A hybrid of the two. Open up space in the existing capacity and increase investment in some of those rotation crops we urgently need. Next step is, are there crops we even haven't thought about, which is the opportunity crops? And I will get back to that in a moment. So mainstreaming zinc then. Zinc, high zinc varieties, it's of no use to see that as a niche market because grain separation makes no sense. So that it's just economically not viable. You cannot trace it, you cannot color it, you cannot distinguish it. So that's not the way to go. So the decision for CIMMYT has been to mainstream minimum nutritional quality elements within the breeding program, not tackle it as a separate added on value, but basically make it a mainstream trait within the breeding programs. That means right now, 24 of CIMMYT's derived high-yielding, high-zinc varieties have been released in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and over time, this will increase as this trait gets more mainstreamed within the breeding programs. When you start, of course, stacking all those requests, we need to go to new technologies that enable us to really accelerate and do better this crop breeding. And this is where I want to have a conversation with you and the scientists to have a conversation with you around how do we use satellites? How do we use gene sequencing? How do we use phenomics? How do we use AI? And AI as being a catchphrase for all kinds of new data constellation, be it language models, be it others, to understand big data that goes beyond what one brain can understand. As for satellite phenotyping, we have been setting up proofs of concepts for big phenotyping breeding platforms with multiple data. This was done under the IWIP collaboration. I'm highlighting that because I know some of you are participating in that. We're trying to make the case to continue this. I think Australian investment would be extremely beneficial. And Matthew and myself, we have been discussing some of that with some of the partners the past days. Can we use tools that have been around for a while, but really focus them on more extreme events? Canopy temperature accurately could predict root capacity. Is there something that we can accelerate around that? That's not very smart. Sorry about that. So is there something we can do around using those tools? Look at cooler temperatures. It's okay. Of course, Obregon is a good site to test some of those hypotheses. And we could actually push the boundaries a bit further with controlled chambers, etc. So just something to think about. Sorry, for collaboration. So adaptation also to warmer nights. Can we identify the genetic diversity in the elite lines? Can we associate them? And can we make a specific panel of wheat that has in the elite lines those genetic diversity that is associated with withstanding warmer nights. And this is one of the trials in Obregon, a specifically designed panel to actually screen for that. Ciudad Obregon being the desert of Sonora, so we get those high night temperatures. If you want to be very clear, if you want to know more information about that, I need to refer you to Matthew Reynolds and his team. Rust early warning. So CIMMYT has set up a network, and Sydney University is part of that network around Rust Phototyping Lab network. So this is a global network that sets up the surveillance, but also sets up the testing, identifying, and warning of governance around new rust strains coming up. This is the next step in that happened after UG99. It is extremely difficult to keep this network funded. It's extremely important. I don't have to tell that in this context, in this country or continent. But in general, globally, it's extremely difficult to get resources for monitoring something that hasn't happened, or monitoring something so you can warn about it before it really creates impact. While, I mean, if you look at how this is set up, how loosely this is funded, it is scary actually how we are dealing with, call it biohazards or call it threats to our global food system that are actually quite logic if you think through it, that you would need those monitoring systems, not even talking about bad agents trying to deliberately target this system. For now, we're just at the level of nature trying to do that. Pushing some of the research boundaries, and again, focus on wheat here, but of course, nitrogen use efficiency in everything we do around cereals is scarily weak, right? It's nitrogen is leaking out of the system everywhere. And so we have a recent new initiative where we want to really aggressively go for a new way of doing the research. So we call it a DARPA style. So DARPA being the defense agency in the US, but we take off the D because it has nothing to do with defense. So an ARPA style sprint. What that means is bring all capabilities together, have a time-bound, clear work plan around it in order to prove or disprove can biological nitrification inhibition in wheat, is that a way to go? Is it viable? Is it not viable? So we have set up a work plan for 2.5 years. We need to run through that. There's no excuse. We need to source from everywhere the information, and then we need to come to a conclusion. So I've already told my scientists, I don't want to hear after 2.5 years, we need to do more research. We have to come to a conclusion. Is this a pathway to further look at, yes or no? And if, what are the limiting factors and what are the missing pieces there? So we're trying this new way of working out, and this is also a call if to be involved if that is of interest to some in the room. This has brought also to CIMMYT a new funder, Novo Nordisk Foundation, who is branching out into agriculture. And I think you all know that they had a few good years. So the company does that is, and the company is owned by the foundation. So we are attracting some of their investments in agriculture. In the end, it is about, and I gave several examples around wheat, given where we are here today. But of course, you could do a similar story around maize, and we are setting up a similar story with the dryland crops. And what I mean is, okay, our objective is healthy and affordable diets. We start with the biodiversity. We have equally 28,000 different maize accessions. We can target breeding. Could be drought-tolerant maize, for example, today planted in millions of hectares, benefiting 42 million people in sub-Saharan Africa. So targeted breeding for drought in maize, set up the seed systems. Can we work with local seed companies in order to get them on board to commercialize and to give access to farmers around those new maize varieties? Bring it all together in a systems approach at the level of the farming system. So really look at sustainable climate resilient agri-food systems, inclusive local development, connect and create the interface with the humanitarian last mile delivery, scaling partners. of course, stack up all the agronomy elements, but also post-harvest. Smart mechanization is an area CIMMYT is working on. And then, of course, this goes into the element of either self-consumption. We are focused on smallholder farmers, so a lot of Mason wheat is consumed at the level of the household directly, but also a lot goes into surplus trade and or local markets with transformation, right? If you look at the upcoming food industry, food and beverage industry in Kenya, in Ethiopia, I know some of you have spent quite some time of their career in Ethiopia. There is a very vibrant food and beverage industry coming up. In Africa, in South Asia, there's already a strong element there. And US, Australia are sourcing quite some of your wheat to that upcoming booming food and beverage industry. Therefore, national and global traders will have an influence. Can we leverage some of this here? This is to do with business continuity. How do you visualize resilience in their value chain? Followed by wholesale markets and agro-industry, retail, and then, of course, consumers. Some of those consumers are farmers themselves, and we go back to healthy and affordable diets. Underpin it with traceability and sustainability frameworks, leverage enabling policies, collaborative research, and impact through partnerships. And of course, this goes across different sectors, as I visualized in the bulbs. That has brought us to the need of rapid feedback loops. So how do we set data sourcing up so that the companies that need to source towards still the SDGs or any other commitments they have made, or the countries that have their NDCs, or the university that has their indicators, can we stitch this all together into data systems that serve multiple purpose decision making? A farmer is probably willing to give data if she can take decisions about what to do on her farm. Can we then stack this up at a community level, stack it up at a national level, and play scenarios with that? I think the technology that is there to do that, but there's a very important governance piece here. Who is going to play the role the CGIAR is playing for the germplasm around data? Is that a data in agriculture? How is that governance piece going to be set up? I think there's quite a discussion to have around that. Very recent, the VAX initiative, you may have heard about the Vision on Adapted Crops and Soils, was launched by Special Envoy for Food Security, Carrie Fowler, was supported by the State Department of the US, has now become a broader platform with the philosophy of saying, can we take some of the opportunity crops, we call it opportunity crops, orphan crops, underutilized crops, whatever you want to call it, in order to bring those into the system as that crop diversification for nutrition and resilience is required. And so today, CIMMYT, together with the FAO, is housing the support cell for this initiative. And at the same time, we have set up a research platform where multiple actors are taking over some of the breeding pipelines for these crops. And it's a combination of an international organization with a national African research institute that is leading each of those seven, starting with 7 breeding pipelines that we are setting up. There's another piece around talent development. So I think we need to have a conversation how we can sandwich or match talent development with the university and African talent. Because if you go to an African country and you ask for a maize expert, you probably get 4 or 5 in the national system. Wheat, depending on where you are, if you go to Ethiopia, also 4 or 5. If you ask for an expert around sesame, you probably get 0.1 of a person around the table that at the same time is doing other elements. So if we accelerate, if we put this on the machine for maize and wheat, who is going to have the capability to receive, to sustain, to translate at national level? So there's a strong capacity building element that we need to get right around this. With that, I would like to wrap it up. There's probably a lot more to tell you about, but this is just to give you a flavor. And I do need to say thank you to all the donors that make the research possible. As you can see, there's multiple there. and so public and private sector. And I hope some of those are in common with your investors, and we probably can go to them with a better and more integrated value proposition if we have a further discussion today. With that, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bram, and that was certainly just not a few flavors, many flavors, very rich piece. So happy to open it up for any questions. And are there any online? Not yet. Okay, so we're in the room. So over to you, sir.
Just a clarification. You didn't mention the pigeon.
Yeah, it's because they are automatically there, right? So I'm telling this story from a CIMMYT perspective.
You're talking about confrontation?
Yep. So that includes ICRISAT. It also includes CIAT for beans. It includes IRI for rice. Of course, some of you may know the ICRISAT story. There's an element around the decision to be part or not of the 1CG. Right now, ICRISAT is part of the CGIAR network. So we are also working together across centers to say one outward-facing effort where we work together on sorghum, where we work together on millets. ICARDA has some research also on some of those crops. So the value proposition should source from the best of each of the organizations in order to support each other. And that may be geographically, that may be capability-wise, that may be et cetera, et cetera.
Ben.
So thank you for a great presentation, and I really like the CIMMYT story. That's just a fantastic outcome. Do you think there's other micronutrients that are deficient in Africa and other countries that you can deliver in the same way?
Short answer, yes. Of course, QPM maize is another example on the maize side. There are other examples on the maize side. There are other examples on the wheat side. But even more is a better. But even more, I think the zinc story is great. If we would redo that same story, we're trying to set it up in a more holistic way. And what I'm trying to say with that is to avoid the unnecessary discussion of, is it better to do it through processing, or is it better to do it, what's most efficient? Should we set up tracing systems? Can we add, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So I think the way to set this up right now and the way we're setting it up is, on the one hand, you streamline it, so it becomes a accepted trade. On the other hand, if it's a targeted intervention for nutrition, we start from the nutritional diet and work with World Veg, work with increasing the content in the grain, work with the processes, and set up that ecosystem for the intervention. So that has resulted in, for example, a strategic alliance between CIMMYT and World Veg, as World Veg is not part of the CGIAR, but we need an equal relationship, because sometimes the intervention, or many times the intervention around vegetables, is more effective than or is complementary than trying to just increase the content in the grain. But sometimes also you cannot afford vegetables, so you're at least happy that you have it in the grain. So there's like a stratification or a targeting exercise to be done depending on which population you want to reach.
Okay, I've got a question online, which I'm going to paraphrase, but it's really about the choice of scope and the movement into legumes. So what's the basis of deciding to go there, and then perhaps coming back to the question around partnership arrangements in that space?
Yeah. So CIMMYT has been working on legumes for a long time, but not on the breeding side. Yeah, so on the agronomy side, on the system side, we have been working. You cannot grow maize in Mexico. You can. We're doing it in Africa in many circumstances, but if you look at the mixed maize or mixed cereal-based systems, they're mixed, and most of the cereal systems are mixed systems. So the working with the crops as part of an intervention from the agronomy side, which is 50% of CIMMYT's work, has been going on for 10 to 15 years. Or bringing into the breeding side some of and open up space for within the maize and wheat capacity for some of those crops, that is new. And that is new in a sense of saying we cannot keep working in silos on the one hand. On the other hand, the way you do breeding, the percent or the portion of that is actually crop agnostic is increasing as technologies increase. But the cost to have access to those technologies is also increasing. So the complexity, the gap between those that can and cannot incorporate those technologies is creating new dynamics. So it's about opening up the platforms in that space where it is crop agnostic and then download it into where it becomes crop specific. The way CIMMYT is setting this up is also quite different now than we did it in the past. In the past, CIMMYT was discussing, and sorry, I'm going to put this down, so discussing up to where is CIMMYT's activity going to go, and then where do the NARs pick it up. Today, if we could set this up new, the discussion is more how do we complement capabilities from here, depending on the strength of the national systems or the systems in place in the countries, which is very different for Africa than it is for Latin America, than it is for South Asia. So the discussion is more about how do we set this pipeline up around a product profile that is identified, than having a discussion, is CIMMYT doing up to here, and then somebody takes it over as a general concept.
Thanks. Sudhir, and then.
Thanks for visiting us and sharing the vision. I work with the area center for another years. I would believe that in that context, in one of your slides, you mentioned scaling to deliver and believing to scale. And I found that very interesting because CG has struggled in that space in terms of, in the past, we had been more towards delivering to scale, and more lately it has been scaling side. Considering now you are thinking about not 10-year plan, it's 2100. So often a large partner after a certain time say that this space is for us. You are not adding what capabilities you are bringing. So that complementation disappeared. So what has been kind of recent talks around that board in CB?
Can I just repeat the question for those online?
Yeah.
Right. So it's really about scaling up and the relative roles of the CG and the national partners.
Yeah. And I would like to open up your question a little bit broader, in the sense that I think it is a mental model from a certain era to say it is CGIAR international research and NARS research. The reality on the ground right now is way more complex. Research doesn't just happen in those two spaces. There's an ecosystem of research, including private sector, including smaller entities, including NGOs are trying to do research. I mean, it's a way more complex environment. So in that complexity, a few maybe key things. Needs to be very clear that CIMMYT as the confined organization is not good at scaling and should not become a scaling partner. That's not what we are good at. There's others that are really good at scaling. 1 acre funds, Mercy Corps, private sector, etc. Having that said, we need to move a little bit here by making sure that we can translate what we do into a space here where we come together with the scaling partners. So there's also not a gap. And that's where you can do division of labor. That's where you can set up some of the methodologies. Because if you look at the scaling partners, their methodological underpinning is probably quite weak. Their decision-making tools to say, what am I going to scale? How am I going to scale it? That is quite weak. Our understanding on how scaling works is probably quite weak, or was quite weak. So we need to generate this interface here where we can come together. And that's what we have done, for example, in Sudan, where we set up a network and an interface together with ILRI, CIMMYT, and SIP, even during the conflict that broke out, together with the Mercy Corps, the CRSs of this world, to say, okay, if you're anyway going to give seed packages, don't take the seed from Iowa because you happen to be sponsored by Corteva, but because that may be not the best maize varieties that you can deliver. There is actually an ecosystem of local African seed companies that have drought-tolerant maize. If you can scale that at the same time, we would actually generate some resilience for when the crisis is over. But that requires that interface. Same with private sector. And let me just quickly do one anecdote and then you can have another question. So within the Mexican context, there's a big company called Bimbo Group. It's actually the owner of many brands around the world. They also have they're a big bakery in Mexico. And so CIMMYT is in Mexico. So you would think, okay, those two, this should be easy. So if CIMMYT puts out a new variety, why are farmers not adopting the variety? And so we did the research, and it came down to a very simple thing of asking the question, why is the group, Bimbo Group, not buying those varieties? They have better quality, and it actually came down to a drop-down menu in the purchasing department of the company. So the guy that is doing the purchasing has a drop-down menu, and it has 4 varieties, that's it. And there is no pipeline set up to inform when that drop-down menu and who should, and this seems like sillily simple, but who should update that drop-down menu, because it wasn't a systematized information stream to actually do so. So we fixed that. It is finding those translational points in order to be able to scale. And sometimes they are very sillily simple, but then, and you can fix it once. The idea is fix it forever, right? So set up the information stream to make sure this doesn't happen again.
We got time for 2 quick questions that have been registered, and then I think we'll have to move. So in the red, yeah.
My name is Sir Ahmed. I'm from Pakistan. I'm using the BNI dryland, and they are performing well. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm happy to see that.
Whether the predictive wheat or confronting wheat will be included in CIMMYT future program, because the green revolution started from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, and we are expecting the gene revolution also coming from maybe from this region.
Thank you. So quick and first BNI, thank you. And if we're not connected to those data, please make sure that we are. Second, on transgenics. So in the strategy exercise, there was a conscious decision that CIMMYT would no longer invest in transgenics, but direct those resources to gene editing. Reason being multiples, but just to be clear that has been a conscious decision. We're not saying transgenics cannot be part. We're still working on some transgenic drought-tolerant maize as proofs of concepts, etc. But the scaling piece to that is quite challenging given the societal environment around it. So our dollar investment is going to gene editing.
Sorry, we've got one question at the back. We're going to have to move on, but please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I did on flooding. I don't think the researcher at flooding is on the top for wheat, especially is on the top. For maize, it's a bit different because, of course, maize is sitting in cropping systems where flooding is more of a problem. I wouldn't say that is top of the agenda. The heat and drought are definitely trumping the flood piece.
One very quick question, then we really have to finish.
I don't expect there to be a green revolution as there was before. So I don't expect there to be like 1 or 2 kind of interventions that make that big breakthrough. If you now condense green revolution for wheat to dwarfing gene, to disease-resistant dwarfing gene, higher yield, that simplicity, and allow me to do it that simple. I don't think that revolution, there will be a second. It's more going to be a transformation of the entire system with multiple entry points at the same time, making a breakthrough. I hope that makes sense.
All right. So on that point, a little anecdote. I had the great pleasure when I was at Erie to meet a guy called Peter Jennings, who was one of the breeders who picked up Borlaug's dwarf wheats and did a lot of work in rice. And I was explaining to him what Erie was doing, and he said, "Oh my God," he said, "it was really easy in the early 60s. We just had to increase yield. And now you have to deal with all of these other factors around environment, around social equity, etc." So I think we're in a much better place now that we're actually thinking about all of those things. But it means we have to be doing what you're doing, which is really thinking about the trade-offs and the synergies. So look, thank you on behalf of everyone. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I think it really hit the top of the hills that CIMMYT's doing. There's a lot more underneath that, of course, within the organisation, but also with the partners. And we're very pleased to have you and team here today and to continue the discussion. So another round of applause and then we have to move on. So thank you.